Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Scott from the things, and he's Darryl from some other stuff. How you doing, man?
Doing all right. I just got out of a 3 hour visit with the dentist, but I'm not doing too bad. Dude, I got to say, like, I know your thing is anti war, and my thing's kind of become anti war too. That intro makes me want to go start a war.
It's a hell of a intro. Listen, I told my buddy Josh to write us a new song, which he did, but he's waiting on the guy to do the drums, so it'll be a little bit different.
All right. Nothing
And
wrong
we'll
with wanting to
see.
start a
We'll see
war.
about the intro. I got a real good intro guy too, or a couple of them, so we're gonna see.
All
It's
right.
we got a good start, but I think we're gonna end up changing it up a little bit. It's a little too intense for my tone. My idea of the show is really just more you and me shooting this shit, a little less intense. Though the subject matter is important stuff, but
Yeah.
the
Speaking of,
drum beat
what
there
are,
reminds me more of like breaking news. Whereas
yeah.
this is more like, man, remember that one thing I'm still mad about?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Speaking of subject matter, what are we talking about?
Well, so first of all, we got to talk about the great Ron Paul, the greatest American who ever lived and is still alive and is turning 90. And we're celebrating his birthday this weekend in Lake Jackson. And so me and Dave Smith and Keith Knight and Dan Sanchez and of course Tom Woods and all kinds of great libertarians. Josie, the redheaded libertarian, and I'm sure Clint Russell's going to be there. Dan McKnight from BringOurTroopsHome.us, and a bunch of people are going to be there celebrating good old Ron and his birthday and eating barbecue like we like to do. And it reminds me about how 20 years ago I caught the tail end. Just you picture that hurricane, those arms. I caught the tail of one of those arms on the way home from Hurricane Katrina, on the way home from Ron Paul's birthday, and damn near drowned in my little green truck, man, trying to make it home down 71 there. While then, Katrina got hit hard, and that was right after, the Cindy Sheehan Camp Casey thing was going on at that time and all that. So finally, confidence in Bush broke after 5 days of not doing a damn thing to help the people in New Orleans. And people were like, wait a minute. This guy might not be the most competent administrator in world history after all. So that was kind of a big deal. But yeah, so I love Ron, and he really is the very best of us. And so we're all going to celebrate that and do some live stream podcasts and hang out and give a little 5-minute speeches and have a good time. So that's all
Sounds like
going
a
down.
great crew, man. Yeah.
Standing room only, I guess, if people want to show up and like look through the open doorway. I think they're sold out, but yeah, that should be fun. And then
Yeah,
I
I'm
wanted
so
to mention
glad
too.
that
Go ahead.
as somebody who, like, like you, was like on the Ron Paul train in '08 and 2012.
Mhm.
Like, it's so nice to see like kind of what he's become in the culture. He definitely did not sort of show up and then fade away. I mean, he got older, so his political career came to an end. But he's just universally admired now, pretty much. I mean, they tried to dismiss him, insult him, everything they could. And in the end, I mean, if you took a poll, I'll bet you of even like MAGA people, he'd probably stand up to Trump in terms of approval. I mean, he's just universally admired. Even people on the left, Democrats and stuff, even they like him. Everybody likes him, and they should. And I'm glad he got to live long enough to kind of see that vindication in the culture. It's awesome.
Yeah,
Gives
yeah,
me a little bit of
absolutely
faith.
right. And look, I mean, anybody. Oh no, Darryl just turned into a JPEG again. Oh, there he is. Hey, yeah, no, you're right. And look, I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, check the archive, 555 articles or so there at antiwar.com/Paul, dating back to the 1990s, talking about Mr. President Clinton. We should not be doing this. This is the kind of thing that's going to cause terrorism against the United States. Come home right now. All this time, his book, A Foreign Policy of Freedom, is all like concerns his, or much of it concerns his first term in Congress, or first terms in the 70s and 80s, before he went back to be a baby doctor for a while and then finally came back in 97. And there he is warning Reagan about going into Lebanon. Don't do this, Mr. President. And then now that we're there, get our Marines out of there before something bad happens, Mr. President. And then, see, I told you something bad was going to happen. Now get them out of there, Mr. President. And then, congratulations, Mr. President, on finally doing the right thing and not doubling down on the war in Lebanon, but instead getting the hell out of there instead of making things much worse and all that. And that's the kind of guy Ron Paul is, and dating back to those times. And even when you could tell he's more right wing and more Cold Warrior when it comes to China and Russia back then, his prescription is always non-interventionism. Shore up freedom and prosperity here. That'll show those commies. And he's just, man, he's always so good. I love him, man. And honestly, like the only things where I ever disagreed with him, things where like he was more conservative than me on immigration. Well, yeah, but that's because he was right and I was wrong, of course. He's absolutely, a doctor, not a lawyer. Great on COVID from the very beginning. What they say is the infection rate and the fatality rate and whatever. Let me set these statistics straight for you, okay? Let me tell you how a virus works, okay? Blah, 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 blah. Perfect from the very beginning. You go check his record from the beginning of 20 with no flaws, right? Without error from the very beginning of that, on everything. Check his archives at lourockwell.com and, of course, at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. But, the archives at LRC and at antiwar.com go way back to the 90s. And it's just, dude, you can't beat that. You absolutely cannot beat that. And by the way, on the personal level, like the reason the guy is charming is because he's not at all like a charming guy. He's like for real, legitimately charming in his just decency. He's still married to his high school sweetheart since they were 16 years old. And with no scandal or hint of that whatsoever, deliver 4,000 babies and he's just a country doctor who understands Ludwig von Mises economics and his own, Rothbardian foreign policy and that anti-government spirit. One of the first things I ever heard of him was on Washington Journal. Well, the first thing I ever heard of him was him accusing George Bush of selling chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. I think probably the second thing I ever heard of him was on Washington Journal. They said, man, guys like you blew up Oklahoma or whatever. People who were anti-government blew up Oklahoma. He goes, my constituents are a lot more afraid of getting blown up by the government like what happened at Waco. And they freaked out. But he wasn't being a tough guy. He was just saying. I have paintings of Ron in the background. I have two busts of Dr. Paul on my bookshelf behind me.
You talk about him being right about all of these things from COVID back to Beirut, and he's just a shining example of how, if you start with the right first principles, it's easy to be right on almost everything,
Yep.
and he's just, he doesn't deviate, and he sticks with that. And, I think also it's that just he's very gracious. It would have been a different experience, maybe more satisfying to you and me and a lot of people, but I think probably would not have gotten the long-term traction that it did if he had come out in that '08 election in 2012 and was just breathing fire on Bush is a war criminal and we need to just all that kind of stuff. It really would not have resonated in that environment with the Republican audience or even conservative leaning people who weren't necessarily Republican. But he wasn't that type, like you said, he might say, I told you so, but it's really to say, look, we knew this was going to happen. We knew this was coming. It's not to be like, nah, I told you so. And it just doesn't do that. He's very gracious and
Right.
it's just, you don't want to confuse the man and the message too much, but in this case, both of them are just exemplary. Really
Yeah,
admire him.
exactly. Yeah, he does the message a lot of justice, you know what I mean, by being the
Yeah.
the leading guy standing behind it. Um, so anyway, that's great. And we got to always mention, I mean, I would hasten to mention, maybe people don't know this well enough, but of course, from the Liberty Report, everybody knows that Ron's co-host is the great Daniel McAdams, who's the director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And he gets a lot of credit for being, he was Ron Paul's foreign policy advisor from at least like 2000, maybe even 99. I'm not sure if it was after Kosovo or before, but he's been, obviously extremely reliable for Ron to work with on foreign policy this whole time. So if you ask him, I mean, read his articles at antiwar.com. It's all substantive stuff. This is not ideological, like, by the Austrian axiom deductive principle of praxeological whatever. No, no, no. All the details about everything that's going on everywhere, whether we're talking about North Korea's nuclear program or the latest from Gaza or whatever it is. He's always 100% on it and sets a really great example in that way too. And Dan gets a lot of credit for that as well.
Yeah. Speaking of presidential candidate, foreign policy advisors, I told you that, I don't think I told you who it was that invited me, but it was RFK Jr.'s foreign policy advisor, invited me to go on a trip to Damascus and meet al-Shara.
Unbelievable.
And the the funny thing is, universally, my wife, everybody that loves me, I mean, this is a guy, former ISIS, quote unquote, former, quote unquote former Al Qaeda in Iraq, now the president of Syria, overseeing butchery after butchery, in that country that's been happening since the takeover. And universally, everybody that cares about me said, no, 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 don't go. And I said, well, I expected that because the Israelis might kill you. And they were dead serious, dude.
Yeah. I mean, hell, even if Al Qaeda kills you, it might be because the Israelis asked them to. You know what I mean? Hey, this guy, he's not a friend of ours. See if you can maybe, sleep him with the fishes there.
Yeah. The Syria situation, like I'm trying to be as open.
That was just such horrible grammar there. I apologize to everyone for that. Go ahead.
I don't want to suck us too much down this rabbit hole. I know we got a different topic in mind, but
Yeah.
the Syria situation, like I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible in the sense of, look, there's obviously like just the hardcore Zionist types who just want to see that country destroyed and in chaos so that they can't mount a threat to Israel and all that kind of stuff. I think there are generally well-intentioned people in the U.S. government. Certainly not all of them, but there are those people who they just look at the situation as, that war, that civil war was never, ever going to, after everything that had happened and all of the hatred that had built up against Assad over the course of that war, which of course we had a huge hand in prolonging and intensifying. Don't get me wrong on any of that. That there was never going to be peace in that country as long as Assad was there, and Assad wasn't leaving voluntarily. And whether we like it or not, or anybody likes it or not, this group of people is the only force around that had the numbers, the military capability, everything else to go in and actually take the country. And then once that happened, like the way that I've had it explained to me by people who are not necessarily sympathetic, but who are kind of taking this as facts on the ground and that we just have to work with and deal with, and they're trying to do that in good faith, is that they tell me, they think, and they could be totally wrong about this, but they're not lying to me. I know these people pretty well, so they might be wrong. They're not lying. They think that al-Shara is by no means a moderate, but a pragmatist. And he's somebody who wants to put Syria back together and be in charge of it. But because of just the loose nature of the forces that he led and the outside interference by Turkey and everybody else with those forces, he does not have full control. He barely has any control really over all the guys with guns in his country. And so he's walking this kind of tightrope where, on one hand, look, you have to make certain compromises if you're going to figure out how to keep the trains running, if they even have any of those left in Syria, but just get the water running, make the sewers work, collect the garbage, all that. I mean, the daily tasks of governing, really the only people who know how to do any of that stuff, at least at a national level or provincial level, or probably former members of the Assad government. And so, you have to like walk this sort of tightrope if you're him, between seeming to compromise too much, maybe with the members of the former regime or officials or even employees of the former regime, or being, because that America could snap their fingers, like there's a lot of Israel could snap their fingers and you get vaporized in an instant if they decide they don't like you anymore. So you have to kind of reach out to the Alawite population, kind of reach out to the Druze population, and so forth. But then the other side of that tightrope is he's got these guys. He's got these like real deal hardcore head chopping jihadists who have all the guns and who brought him to power. And if they think that he's being too accommodating, or he's not going hard enough and not turning Syria into enough of an Islamic republic, he could end up in his own Gaddafi video, which, given his past, might be poetic justice. But in terms of like, I guess here's the thing, I'll stop ranting. But and again, don't get me wrong, you and I agree on this. Most of the people out there who were listening, like, we all agree on this situation. I'm just kind of playing around with the situation as it stands. One thing I do see is that, and this is mostly with like left wing anti war people, although you see it on the right sometimes now too, is, you know, it's easy to be so against US intervention and Israeli belligerence and all these things to the point that you're almost rooting for the axis of resistance, right? And I understand that. Like, I understand the desire. Like, it's just like with Russia and Ukraine right now. Like, you feel like the empire needs to get checked. You know, the empire needs to like know that there's a limit out there to what it can achieve, and that it's going to hit its head against a wall if it goes too far. The problem is like that I see is like, you know, people, even if the regime that's in Syria right now, and I don't think this is going to happen by any means for a number of reasons, but even if it was the best chance for that country to be put back together and become a non-failed state, I think there's a lot of people I see out there who like they almost don't. It's not that they don't want that, but that's a secondary consideration to Israel getting theirs, you know, and the resistance axis showing, you know, the empire that like they're not going to back down, all that. And it's, you know, it's easy to get caught up in that, and I sympathize with that tendency, but we do have to kind of watch out for that, because the goal should be that like all of the normal people in Syria, which is most of the people there, can wake up tomorrow and not worry that their kids are going to get killed or raped, or, you know, that a mob's going to come destroy their village. Like, that's what we all want. That's the point, you know? And anyway, rant over. I just, yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So,
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, this is our brand new book, our 17th book, just hit like within the last couple of hours here. The Libertarian Institute's 17th book. It's by the absolutely heroic William Van Wagenen, who is an incredible investigative journalist. He's been writing deep, deep dives on Obama's dirty war in Syria for years for us at the Institute. And his book, long promised, is finally unleashed, and it's the CIA's covert war, creative chaos, the CIA's covert war to, I'm sorry, what was it? Overthrow, God, I can't see it from here with my old eyes. The overthrow
topple Syrian government.
Yeah, there you go. So this it just hit. It's on Amazon.com right now. You'll be able to find a link from the Libertarian Institute very soon. And there's just nobody better on this than William Van Wagenen to explain. And, you know, when you say the axis of resistance, what that really is, it's the Shiites plus Hamas, right? But that's what it is. And the Alawites were very close to the Shiites, and some consider, you know, their group to be kind of an offshoot or like a combination of whatever, but close enough. And they were tied to Tehran. That's the important part. And now that's over forever. Alawites aren't taking Damascus back. I mean, it's a supermajority Sunni Arab country anyway. So the relative extremism of the dictator or president going forward remains to be determined. As you say, this guy is a bin Ladenite, leader of the suicide bomber brigades with John Brennan, right? So we can expect the worst from him, or as you said, is what I've been saying since he took over. He's really going to kowtow to the U.S. and Israel that bad, his own guys are going to cut his head off and replace him sooner or later anyway. So they have really made a deal with the devil here. I mean, this guy, look, he's clearly been to Turkish intelligence finishing school so that he's not, they told him, stop cutting people's heads off and doing suicide attacks, okay? We can't spin that. So just knock off that, right? So in other words, don't throw gays off the roof and don't look like Baghdadi, and we'll let you live. We'll let you take over, and we'll even back you. Just don't be a Shiite. And that's the deal, right? And so they're willing to tolerate him. But I mean, to me, it just portends chaos. There's no way around it. Like, we're just in the in-between time before things get much worse over there. And it's, of course, already, you've had all kinds of Alawites and Christians being slaughtered, as well as the Druze, which gives the Israelis an excuse to intervene and take even more of the southern part of the country in the name of protecting the Druze there. And it's just a disaster, you know. Not that I care at all. I don't sympathize at all with the axis of resistance. I don't, whatever. I'm against the U.S. government doing things, but that doesn't put me on the other side of the thing. But I'm saying it's a disaster just because these are guys who were sworn loyal to bin Laden and then Zawahiri, which means that sooner or later, potentially now later, because they seem to be so cooperative with American intelligence at this time, but they very well are likely to come back to bite us. We've seen this over and over again. Just because Bill Clinton backs jihadis in one place doesn't mean they won't turn around and hit us in another. And so, these things happen, and it's just, and honestly, man, we're about to talk about Russiagate, and I am so upset about Russiagate still. It's like the Waco fires. I'm not over it. I'm not going to be over it. And yet, I want Tulsi Gabbard to simply turn over everything to justice and then get back to keeping bin Ladenites off of these shores. I want her and Joe Kent all day. I don't want them to wage war overseas and kill people. I am not saying that. I wrote a book about stop doing that. I'm not giving them that mandate. But keeping these guys off of our shores is the absolute highest responsibility. There's just nothing that should be taking from their attention to that one and only goal. Because there's nobody else threatens us in this world than bin Ladenite suicide bombers. That's the threat.
Yeah, well, there's the threat of an attack. That's one threat, but in a way, that's almost the minor threat. Just like with 9/11, as tragic as it was, 3,000 people killed. It was horrible. The real threat was our reaction to it. Our predictable and predicted reaction to it. And for some, for people who want to see an end to this style of foreign policy we've been enacting for decades now. Another big terrorist attack, it doesn't, I mean, how people are like when something like that happens. They can be people you were having a conversation with them yesterday and they totally get it. They're totally down.
Through it,
very
man.
reasonable.
I lived through this. My
and then it happens
in the 90s, some like real anti-government guys, some like real anti-New World Order guys signed their son up for the army. As soon as W. Bush got in there, even before 9/11, it was like, oh, everything's okay now. What? I mean, it's just, man, it's amazing.
Yeah. And that's the real concern, because I think I've always thought, or at least for many years, going back to maybe, the early years of the Syrian civil war, that, the real goal was not regime change in the sense that we did it in Iraq or something like that. The real goal was just to reduce that territory to chaos and fluctuating governments and rival militias and sectarian factions, because that just gives you a permanent excuse to go in there and do whatever you want, like the Israelis have been doing. I mean, that's just like it's a perfect example. You have this guy who, at least in his rhetoric, right, is talking about, and this is a remarkable thing when you really think about it, given his background and who supports him in that country and everything, but him going out publicly and saying he's willing to talk to the Israelis and all this, like, you would think that they would really want to make sure that this guy, as long, if he changes his tune, you can take care of it. But at least for now, you'd think they want to keep him around. But the first thing they do when they took power is just blew up his defense ministry, blew up all his military equipment. I mean,
sank his Navy.
Yeah. And certain things, like if they think there's chemical weapon stores or if they're just heavy long range missiles or something, maybe that's fine, whatever. But, they were destroying APCs and things that you need if you have a jihadist uprising and then you southwest of the country, or something. And so, it kind of just shows you that the goal here is chaos. The same thing they want for Iran. They don't want MEK to take over. They don't really think the Shah is going to go back and be welcomed with roses in the streets. Yeah. They just want it to be a failed state with Persians fighting Baluchis, fighting Azeris, and everybody else. That's what they want.
Darryl, remind me, I'm sorry, because I do a lot of shows and I can't keep track anymore, man. But forgive me if I'm being redundant, I'll stop. But did we talk about the Oded Yinon plan on the show last week or in one of these recent times? Okay, so Oded Yinon, I brought this up. Did I tell you that I did a 10-hour interview with Lex Friedman? That's going to come out in a couple of weeks. He's got to edit some things together. But one thing is, I told him, well, look, and one thing he did was he stopped and pulled up everything that I mentioned and then would read a little like the AI summary on Google. What is the Oded Yinon plan? It's ODEDYNON. And it's essentially like an insane, paranoid, schizophrenic, lunatic, Likudnik advisor to Ariel Sharon. And he wrote it in, I'm pretty sure, 81. And the first premise of the thing.
So he was defense minister at the time, Sharon.
God, was he?
Yeah.
Okay. I had forgotten that it was that bad. I had trauma-based blocked that out, I guess. He says, listen, man, obviously the Soviet communists are about to conquer the entire world. And we have only one choice then, which is to secure our regional dominance by smashing every Arab state into as many pieces, the smallest pieces possible, and to just sow complete chaos. That's the only way we'll be able to survive in the new one world communism. And of course, the Soviet Union ceased to exist by the end of the decade, but whatever, man. Still sounds good. Way better than making peace, as they put it, land for peace. Like they're being forced somehow to give up their own land as the price of peace rather than to stop stealing it, which is actually kind of different. But that was the way they looked at it was, hey, man, you know what I mean? It's like a cut in the national government. Well, we just meant a cut in the rate of future growth.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Or they say like, they'll make an announcement that inflation has been cut in half, and people say, "Great, prices are going down." No, 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 no.
The
The
rate
rate of rise has.
That's right. Yeah, the rate of our expansion in the West Bank sometimes varies, but it never ends, of course. Anyway, so I think there's a lot of that going on. And I need to go back, actually, Darryl, because I don't think I memorized this. But there is at least one sentence hanging in. It's either in the Clean Break or in Coping with Crumbling States, where Wormser says something like, well, and if that doesn't work, at least there'll be smaller broken pieces, something like that. I need to get that exact quote. So that would be, Yinon echoed later in the Clean Break policy, which the Clean Break policy was, it's going to be great. It's going to be easy. We're going to have our way, and then I guess chaos was plan B or C, which is what we're seeing a lot now. But
I mean, we're seeing these last couple, or really, I mean, this last year and a half, 2 years, we've really seen the culmination of kind of decades of events, taking that have been. I mean, you go back to the 60s and 70s, the Ba'athist regimes, the Egyptians before they made peace with Israel. I mean, they were mortal enemies not only of Israel, they were mortal enemies of all of the Gulf monarchies. That they saw as standing in the way of this pan-Arab dream that they had. Of course, they all wanted to be in charge of the big pan-Arab state, but they all shared that, at least ideologically, but not the monarchies, because the monarchies are like, my family literally owns all of this land. Why would I join some Arab superstate now? And one by one, I mean, every single one of those secular dictatorships has been picked off and destroyed. And one thing you got to say, I mean, this is a macabre sort of admission, I guess. But, I was thinking the other day about Obama back in it was 2011, I guess, saying a couple times, Assad has to go. Assad must go.
Yeah.
And you go back to 2016, 2017, and it was looking like, wow, I guess he's not going anywhere. The empire has to take a loss on that one. But you always got to remember, man, there's people here like behind the scenes who make a career out of this shit, and they do not go to sleep when it fades from the news. They keep on it, and it's one of those things that if you don't have a robust counterintelligence defense and just military defense and a stable enough government and civil society to withstand that kind of pressure over the long term, you're just not going to make it once the eye of Sauron turns on you, And they thought they could do that to Russia, and it's looking like they're probably not going to be able to do that, which is not surprising to most of us. But that's how it goes. You have we kind of tell ourselves that, or we used to tell ourselves this, I guess. We came out of the Gulf War, like the first Gulf War. And I mean, if you ask, like, I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago, it might have been in an interview actually, but he brought up the Gulf War and he was like, and what do we take? Do we even take any casualties? And I was like, yeah, we took some, but that's how people think about it. Like, it was like as if we took no casualties and we just went in there, we saved the day. We don't even know if we killed any Iraqis. Like, most people don't know. It's just, we went in and just by our presence, like the whole thing kind of melted away. And we came away with this idea that like, wow, I guess the US military with all their fancy new technology and, smart guided bombs, everything else, we can just absolutely do anything with the US military. It's this all purpose tool that we can just apply at will anywhere in the world for any problem that we find. And we thought that, and we tried it. and it's failed for 25 years. And now what I really hate, and we should get into this like another time, because like everybody kind of agrees now that nuclear weapons, like maybe it's not like a war crime on the level of biological and chemical weapons, just because if things go nuclear, then we're in a whole new world like that day. But like everybody kind of agrees, chemical, biological weapons, that is just off limits. And if you do that, you are a rogue regime, and you have no standing, no legitimacy, et cetera, et cetera. I really think we need to apply that same mentality to this, to what has really become like our chief foreign policy tool, it seems like, over the last several decades, which is, think about, I was listening to somebody give an interview. Somebody give an interview who, she lived in the United States, but her family lived in Aleppo when they were taken over by all the, like, not this last time, but like when they were occupied by the jihadists for a while. And talking about how, they would go outside and they can't read the spray paint writing on the walls because it's different languages, because the Chechens own those blocks and the Afghans own those blocks and the Syrians own those. And it's just a bunch of gang territory. They would get into gang machine gun battles in the streets. And these are all a bunch of, 20-year-old psychopaths from the slums of Karachi or wherever, from the slums of Brussels, just put out a call, like in the way they did it too, right? Think of how, I know we're probably not wanting to get like a rated R thing on this, but think about how fucking evil this is, dude. To put out the kind of ISIS propaganda that was coming out, right? I saw a video. I don't know how many of them you saw. I didn't see very many of them, but I saw a couple. And there was one where they had a bunch of prisoners chained up to broken down carnival rides, and they had kids executing them on the carnival rides, right? Just cartoonishly evil. So you put those videos out as a recruiting tool, and who do you think you're going to get? You're going to get the craziest dudes in the world who are all going to come to participate in this. And so we do that. We create this situation where that call's being put out, and these people are flooding into the country with no like military leadership or discipline, no nothing. It's just a bunch of crazy psychopaths with guns running around this country. And like they would talk about how, like, imagine you're in Aleppo and you're in that situation, and you're in there with your wife and your 2 daughters, and there's just dudes, hopped up on Captagon, just going by firing their guns in the air. You're just praying they don't come into your house, because you know what happens if they do. And your only option at that point is decide whether you're going to die over it or not, and just an awful, disgusting thing to do to another country. I don't care what the government did or what the people did, to just take a bunch of undisciplined, no military governorship, just young psychos, and give them guns and send them into a place and say, go destroy that place and take down the government. I heard somebody describe Syria this way. I think it's a great way to describe it. And then I'll stop. Is they said, imagine if like Russia or China got together with like the KKK, neo-Nazi factions, all the craziest hardcore right-wing people like in the US who, are hiding in the shadows or whatever. And they just load them up with heavy weapons and provide intelligence and middle level leadership by bringing other people in from other places that have already kind of done this kind of thing before. And they were to say, go march on Washington and take down the US government. And on their way to Washington, they just stopped by in every town and city and killed all the Jews and blacks and everything else. That's what we did to Syria. And it's crazy and it's evil. And I really hope that one day that tactic, that way of waging war against a country, is really looked at the same way we look at biological weapons, because it's just awful.
Yeah. No, look, you couldn't be more right about it. Normally I would have just said, yeah, everybody get enough already, but even better, it just hit. I mean, today, this evening around dinner time, it hit Creative Chaos by William Van Wagenen, brand new, hot out. He really deserves the recognition and the boost for all you book readers out there. It's such an important book. I'm the publisher of the thing, so I've read it, and I've supported his work for a very long time. He is such a great guy. He's been kidnapped by Al-Qaeda for real, dude. He has done long-term investigative journalism, including in Iraq and in Syria. camping out with the Yazidis and getting the real story on what happened here, man. And believe me, I was good on Syria years before they even launched the thing, and I know what from who was good on it and who was not, right? And yeah, man, this is the best that you can get on the origins. It's not the whole war, but it's how it all started and how it
Yeah.
was the U.S. government, of course, with our NATO allies, Britain and especially France, and then of course the GCC, and Israel and Turkey, and it was all about trying to, as I say every day of my life, I guess, W. Bush put the Ayatollah up 2 pegs in Baghdad. So now he had to take him down a peg in Damascus. That's what it was all about. That's what the redirection was all about. And that's the story I tell, in the book and at the academy and all that. But, even in my book, I'm the very first to give credit to William Van Wagenen for doing so much great research. And I cribbed from a lot of great journalists, and I give them all credit too. I read a lot of books about it, and I read a lot of journalism about it, but he is absolutely 5-star, top notch, as good as you could possibly get. And I guarantee that Joshua Landis and Sharmeen Narwani and Moon of Alabama, Bernard and Max Blumenthal and all of the best guys on Syria would tell you the very same thing. That like this is as good as it gets. Is Creative Chaos, brand new out, but they've all read his stuff. If you look him up at the Libertarian Institute, you can read all his great writing there. And when I say long form pieces, I mean like 50,000 words. These are the kind of articles that he's been writing for me for years, dude. I mean, it's just incredible stuff. So, and I do have the short version in enough already, including a lot on Israel's role in the thing and all that. So here's the segue, because we want to talk about Russiagate. We've been putting it off. I almost want to just put it off more and talk about other things, because I'm going to have Matt Taibbi on the show tomorrow, and he's just the best of the best. And I still have not had a chance. I've read some articles about it, but I have not had a chance myself to do the deep dive on the annex to the Durham report, or even the declassified version of the House investigation of the
Yeah, let's do
CIA.
that next week. That's fine. I mean, I don't
Wanna do
mind
that?
anyway, because
I
there's
mean,
stuff
I'm
still
really
coming
good on the
out.
background, but I'm not very good on the new developments, and it'd be better maybe to just really nail that down all the way, you know?
Yeah, and it's connected to this Syria stuff for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
in the sense that if you think about it, like there were I think probably 3 real purposes to Russiagate, right? To that whole effort that was put out there. One, of course, like the initial one maybe, was to muddy the waters with regard to the DNC emails and the Podesta emails, because those were going to be so damning for Hillary Clinton. If people just focused on what they did to Bernie Sanders, that was going to be a huge problem. Then it was to just the Trump focus was, I don't, they knew, we're kind of finding out now that they knew from the beginning that Trump was not colluding with Russia. They knew from the beginning that Russia probably didn't even hack those emails. But if you can use that as an excuse to go through his whole life, talk to everybody he knows and everybody they know, and put pressure on every single person that has the slightest little taxi cab medallion scandal or whatever else it is, threaten them all with prison, bankrupt them by bringing them in and making them pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to lawyers, like they did with campaign volunteers, Michael Caputo. This dude was just a campaign volunteer, and he had to sell his house because he had to pay lawyers hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was not some rich dude or anything. And there were a ton of people in the administration who left the administration not because they were getting all kind of fed up with things. They were like, dude, I can't keep getting pulled in for these DOJ interviews. This is like costing me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't afford it. And so they would leave. And it kept a lot of people from even joining the administration. And so I think that the goal really, with the investigation part of it, was really just them thinking that Trump, this guy, the grab him by the pussy dude, like this dude, give us all of his email, give us all of his people around him, and like, dude, by the time we're done piling up dirt on this guy that we're gonna find, people aren't even going to remember Russiagate. Like that's going to be like,
Yeah.
it's just a long, and it's amazing to me actually that turned out not to be the case. And I don't know if that's just because Trump's lived his life in the tabloids, so it's all in public anyway. But the fact that they didn't, I mean, imagine like if they were to go through Hillary Clinton's whole life with the same fine tooth comb they did with Trump, dude, should be getting the electric chair. You know what I mean? Like, and that's true of a lot of people. And so he's relatively clean in that sense. But then, as it relates to this, I think, and this is probably why a lot of the deep state kind of went along with it as long as they did and as hardcore as they did, is that because at first this was just a Clinton problem.
Well, look, they
You know
said
what I mean?
the FBI told CNN, if we can't remove him through the 25th Amendment, at least we can rein him in with this special
Well,
counsel investigation.
and specifically rein him in on Syria and Ukraine. Those were the two things that they cared about.
Implementing Minsk too, most of all. Now,
Yeah.
hold on one second, because two things. First of all, I wrote 75 pages on Russiagate. It's the longest chapter, kind of subchapter, chapter type section thing in Provoke that I did. I debunked every single lie about Russiagate that I could possibly remember, because I was terrified someone would say, oh yeah, but what about this one? And I'd miss it. But you just got me, and I realized this a couple of weeks ago too. I miss Caputo. I do not have a section on Caputo in my Russiagate section, and curse me for that. Will you please tell us about him?
Oh, I don't know a whole lot about him. I've talked to him a few times. I've mentioned him before in articles and interviews and his story, and just in sympathizing with him. And he reached out and just because he saw or read something and said thanks, and we kind of corresponded a bit. I don't know a lot about him. Just that he was just a. I mean, there was never even an accusation against this guy. There was never even an implication that he was accused of anything. This was purely just lawfare. This was taking this dude who is a normal guy. This is not some rich dude. You know, a lot of people, for some reason, think that, like, if you're working for a presidential campaign or something, you got money to burn. That's not the case with a lot of these people. And he was a volunteer. And they just kept pulling him in. And every time you do it, I mean, you got to hire good lawyers to go in there with you, because, you know, they're really, really good at manipulating people and getting you to trip up and contradict yourself. And if they're going for blood the way they were during the Russiagate thing, I mean, them tripping you up, that could be a jail sentence. I mean, that's where they were going. That's a perjury felony jail sentence. And so you got to hire these lawyers. And it's just every time they call you in, it's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Do it again in 3 months. Do it again 3 months later. And they're doing this to regular people, campaign volunteers, you know? And it's just, it's one of those things that is just emblematic of how, you know, they are in their minds. And somebody as sanctimonious as Comey might even believe this about himself. Hillary doesn't believe it, but like Comey might, that he's really the patriot here. He's the one who's trying to step in and save the republic from itself. It's like, well, yeah, but you guys are going out and just destroying the lives of random campaign volunteers, American citizens, the people you're trying to protect, right?
Yeah.
And there's just no concern for that. They didn't care. They were just.
Oh, you're so right.
You know,
and listen, as far as I know, I always sound like I'm probably spinning for these guys, like rationalizing their behavior in a way when I talk about how they rationalize their behavior. Just what you just said, that they know that they're the patriots here. So there's a great clip of John McLaughlin, who had been the acting director of the CIA. And they asked him, Trump says, it was at some think tank event. Trump says it's the deep state acting against him. And he laughs and he says, thank God for the deep state. And the whole audience laughs and applauds. And he says, now let me tell you something. The problem is not at Langley. It's not at the Hoover Building here in DC. And it's not at Fort Meade, that is NSA headquarters. The problem is at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So you could see how, if Donald Trump was a Manchurian candidate, blackmailed slave of Vladimir Putin, then John McLaughlin might have a point, that these men are sworn to uphold the Constitution and protect it from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so even though these are all three completely extra constitutional post-republic national security, you know, agencies of the government, and they're coming at the president this way, maybe they'd be heroes if it was all true, right? But it wasn't at all. They were the ones framing him. It was all just a giant hoax, and they were punching far above their weight when, in fact, he literally is the one and only elected member of the executive branch and the chief executive, the boss of those departments, the boss of them. And they just got no right whatsoever. And by, January 20th, they should have just been saying, oh, well, and that's the way it goes. The people did elect him. And again, they knew they were lying. So let me go back because I want to clarify something that you said, that because about covering up for Hillary's emails, a big part of what was going on there was it was not covering up for the leaked emails. That didn't come until later. It was covering up for the missing emails. That they were already investigating the 30,000 emails that she had deleted from her own private server, which were obviously regarding her corruption and taking millions of dollars from foreign governments while she was Secretary of State. And in the meantime, in between the first Obama term after she resigned and then the lead up to the election campaign of 15 and 16, where they were pouring all this money into her campaign, and she had deleted all those emails. And that was the big scam. And it's so funny because if you think back to all the times that the liberal Democrat Russiagate believer said, oh, but her emails. When like, yeah, no, exactly. That's why they came up with the Russiagate thing in part, was so that you would say that. So that you go, oh my God, here's this true gigantic conspiracy about Trump and Russia, but you're upset that her emails are missing as like this tiny little thing. Well, that was, I mean, think of the manipulation there and how successful that was. But stop and rewind because there's a very important story. In fact, I have it here. Let me get the title right for everybody here. This is a story that came out last year, and it's by our heroes over at Racket News, the great Matt Taibbi, who, as I said, is going to be on my show tomorrow. And God dang me if I can't find this. Oh, no, it wasn't him. It was it is him, but it was at Public because he wrote it with Michael Schellenberger. Okay, so this is public.news is their Substack, okay? And the article is called, what's a long headline? FBI helped Clinton campaign. This is not it. Is it? Wait. Nope, this is not it. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Wait, I'm going to find it. This is it. This is it. CIA had foreign allies spy on Trump team, triggering Russia collusion hoax. Okay, now sources say, so this part of it is not fully documented, but I totally think that this is clear because there are many parts of it that are documented, okay? And that is that John Brennan, the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra suicide bomber brigades in Syria, committer of high treason against the United States and his support for al-Qaeda there, who framed Trump, that he started this in the end of 2015. And we have two different sources that say that it was GCHQ that started it. But I think it's pretty clear that he contacted them. And this is, I think, what the source is telling Taibbi and Schellenberger here. He contacted them and said, listen, I need you guys to pretend that you had a reason, that you tipped me off, that I need to do this, whatever. And then he went and he had like a whole swarm of informants bump, as they called it, into Trump campaign people in order to try to frame them. And I think that it's just perfectly, well, no, it's not perfectly clear, but it's in this article that this is what their source says. And I think it's very, very likely. And you know, it is still in speculation, but it seems very clear to me, seems very likely to me that this is the origin of the actual framing of George Papadopoulos. When you had this so-called Russian spy who was actually a Maltese professor who was working for MI6, leave information with him.
Is that Mifsud?
Mifsud. Yes.
Yeah, Mifsud. Yeah, he actually had some kind of a tie to the State Department, I think, too.
Yes, and MI6. And I show all this in the book thoroughly. That this guy had no ties to Russia whatsoever, except he had one friend at a think tank there, but that was meaningless. And he was palling around with MI6 and CIA and military officials all the time, and including at this spy training academy in Italy and all of these things. So it seems, emphasis, but it seems as though he was meant to put something in Papadopoulos' ear, and then Downer, the Australian diplomat, was made to try to take the garbage out and get him to say something to him. Papadopoulos swears he never even told that guy anything because he was such a jerk to him. He never said anything to him at all. And then Downer later backed down from the New York Times claims that he had said that Papadopoulos told him that the Russians told him they had all this dirt on Clinton. It wasn't true. And in fact, they didn't even use that as an excuse to take it to the FISA court to try to get their FISA warrant against Trump or any of the team, because they just didn't even have the courage to take that lie. And in fact, McCabe, I believe it was the FBI official, said that there was just nothing enough to it to even pretend in, basically.
Yeah, and that's when they switched over to Carter Page.
Yeah, but see, also, there's this really important article by a guy named Stephen Schrage, Schrage, and he wrote a thing, maybe not CH, maybe it's just SHRAGE. And he had been a foreign policy advisor to Mitt Romney. He's like a Heritage Foundation type, I think. And he was studying at Cambridge under Stephen Halper, the walrus, they called him, who was this longtime Republican fixer. He was the one who stole Jimmy Carter's debate talking points and gave them to the Reagan campaign back in 1980, was known as being very close to the Bushes and so forth. And would
You
get
work for
paid
that
through.
good think tank, right? That recently got disbanded.
That's right, the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, which was previously known, famous for Harold Road, the neocon, coming in and firing everybody who knew anything about Iraq in the run-up to that war. But anyway, that was like the cutout where they would pay him $30,000 for an article, supposedly that was actually for dirty work he was doing. And so he had, Schrage was studying under him, and so he was like eyeball witness to what he called the Cambridge Four, which was, and he took responsibility in an accidental kind of a way for the framing of Carter Page. Because, so here's the Cambridge Four, was Christopher Steele from the Steele dossier, the former MI6 officer, Richard Dearlove, the former chief of MI6, who you might remember him from the Downing Street memo that said that the intelligence is being fixed around the policy to justify the war with Iraq from July of 2002. He was the head of MI6 for Tony Blair at that time. Then there was an academic from Cambridge named Christopher Andrews, who I believe was also former MI6 or MI5. And then was Halper. And Halper was there, had a visiting professorship of some kind or whatever at Cambridge as well. And these guys were all tight friends, and they got Schrage to like organize the event, and he is the one who decided to invite Carter Page because they just want to have someone from the Trump campaign. And the way he described it was that Halper was really rude to Page and paid him no mind until Richard Dearlove showed up and whispered in his ear or took him aside and talked to him. And then all of a sudden, Halper wanted to be best friends with Page and sidle up to him and offer to, work with him and whatever. And it was after that that Page turned up in the Steele dossier, and that and Danchenko told the FBI, who was one of the sources for the Steele dossier, he told the FBI that he got Page's name from Halper, and then he recycled the name and gave it to Steele when Steele was there anyway. And so this was, part of the thing where they framed Carter Page. Carter Page being a advisor to the Trump campaign, foreign policy advisor, who had some business ties to Russia, but was a loyal American patriot and a CIA informant who, whenever he went to Russia and did any business or met any man in business or politics over there, he would always come back and debrief the CIA about who he met and what he was doing. They knew him to be a loyal asset. And when famously, now kind of infamously, the CIA sent a memo saying exactly that to the FBI, and the FBI censored that out of their submission to the FISA court asking for a warrant against this American citizen. No probable cause here. Now it's an objective, reasonable belief that this guy is a foreign agent. So we get to go fishing on him all day, and 2 hops from him. Anyone he calls and anyone they call. We get to surveil all them too. Now, because this guy, we're accusing him of being a foreign agent, and he ended up being the lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, is the only one convicted for Russiagate so far, who was sentenced to a slap on the wrist, a year probation for doing that. But they framed one of their own loyal assets and went along and let him be framed. And even though he wrote a letter to the director of the FBI saying, please interview me, I want you to interview me, and they refused to interview him for months and months and months because they knew how innocent he was. And when they finally did interview him after Trump took office, after the ICA of January 2017, where they made all these accusations and everything, they finally interviewed him. He went down there with a PowerPoint presentation. He went down there and met him 5 times, and no lawyer, maybe he had a lawyer, but just spilled his guts the whole time. Of course, he had nothing to hide whatsoever. It was a total frame-up job that they were doing there. And then so this poor guy, Stephen Schrage, says, geez, I'm sorry, Carter Page. I think I got you into this, right, by inviting you to this thing. And now I realize you were set up by my boss and his buddies in Cambridge 4. And that same guy, Schrage, he says he proved he recorded all of his conversations with Stephen Halper. And so he has, and they published this at Racket.news. They published the audio of Halper talking about how they were framing up Mike Flynn and how they were going to get him in so much trouble, and then he's going to lose his temper and freak out. And that's what's going to get him fired. You watch. That's why he's so ill-suited to this job. And then what they do, this is right at the same time that Obama is ordering the intelligence community to explain how Russia did it. Right? In other words, begging the question, assuming the conclusion, not find out if they did it and assess what they did, but how they did what they did. And right at that same time is when they're framing Flynn. You have Mike Flynn, who is a 3-star general, retired, former head of intelligence for JSOC in Iraq, former head of intelligence for and right-hand man to General Stanley McChrystal in the Afghan surge, who then goes to be the head of DIA. He is now the designated, and by the way, why was he fired? He was fired, Darryl, because he was passing secret intelligence to the Germans as DIA director. He was heroically insubordinate, passing intelligence to the Germans to pass to Assad to use to kill al-Qaeda in Syria. And there's a Seymour Hersh article about this called Military to Military. And it's about that this heroic insubordination where the military is helping Assad kill the CIA's suicide bomber squads. Tough, right? So that was why Obama got rid of him.
And that whole crew are so nasty, man. Didn't they?
Yeah.
They invited Flynn to a dinner at one point that he attended, and there was a woman there. I can't remember her name now. I would have known it back in 2016, 2017 when I was obsessed with this story. But
Svetlana
Lokava
was her name, and this was another thing. She
trusted Halper, like she knew him and trusted Halper.
Right. She was the student of Christopher Andrews. And it was Christopher Andrews set up his own grad student she was writing an essay or a book about an previously unknown secret group of Soviet spies in the United States in the 1930s. And they tried to pretend that she was a swallow and she was a new mother and a new wife. And they smeared her as a spy and a whore and said that she had done all of this and had slept with Flynn. He had taken her back to his hotel and all this stuff. It was the same group. It was Christopher Andrews and Stephen Halper and all them that did that to him. At the same time that the FBI had the intercepts of him on the phone with the Russian ambassador to the United States, where he did absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever. We had every right to be on the phone with this guy, although he should have known better than to just set himself up to get screwed by the Obama people this way. But he did not do anything wrong on that call other than ask the Russians to veto a UN Security Council resolution against Israel, which they declined to do for him. But he did not ask them or make any promises about lifting sanctions against Russia or anything like that. And they lied. We don't know if they either won. And I'll tell you, one of the very best things on this is a documentary at Tucker Carlson's website that they did about Flynn. They did such a good job of explaining this, how they brought Vice President Pence into the Situation Room and they either read him in on the lie and said, we're going to pretend this says what it doesn't say, or they gave him a fake transcript. Either way, someone was lying. And they said, look, you made all these promises to lift sanctions to the Russian ambassador, and you lied to me about it, Mr. Flynn. And then he took that to Trump, and Trump fired the guy. It was one of the major successful things of the coup. All this is just completely made up. And I'm not a big fan of Mike Flynn. I wrote about him in Fool's Errand and in Enough Already. And yet he was never a traitor for the Russians, for God's sake. And this poor woman, Lakova, never did anything improper. She says she could prove she didn't even sit next to him at that thing. And she sued and sued and sued and sued until the British courts said, listen, lady, stop suing. We already denied your standing for whatever loophole reasons. And so, but there's zero reason to believe the accusations against her and every reason to believe in her 100% innocence there. And it just goes to show the absolute depravity of these people, what they will do. They're just this.
Well, there was that other Russian woman, the one who was like a gun rights activist, I think.
Maria Butina.
She did like 18 months in solitary, and she did nothing wrong.
She was, as you say, she was trying to get guns legalized in Russia. She wasn't trying to influence American policy in any way. She was trying to get advice from American Republicans about how to handle the public relations for getting gun rights liberalized there in Russia. And then you're right, they just absolutely smeared her. See, there was this woman a couple years before named Anna Chapman who actually was a Russian spy, and they deported
not going to forget her name.
Yeah, and see, she was a hot redhead. Well, so was Maria Butina. So they went, oh, look, see, get it? Hot redhead. And then, so that's all you need to know. Did somebody say sex? And then, so they just got to pretend that she had infiltrated the Republican Party, that she had this relationship with this American Republican activist, and how somehow any of this was nefarious. And then you're right, they locked her in solitary until she would plead guilty to a FARA violation, which 99% of Washington, D.C. is guilty of and is only very rarely and selectively enforced.
And it's
Which
highly
she was
questionable
not
whether she
guilty
was
of at
even.
all. She hadn't done
Yeah,
anything to represent Russia's interests in this country.
exactly,
She was trying to
exactly.
represent just freedom's interests in Russia, period.
She was looking for like advice from people
That's right.
over here on like how can I, yeah,
There's a great
insane.
article about her by James Bamford, the great intelligence beat reporter who wrote all the books about the NSA and everything. And he wrote a piece about her for the New Republic called "You People Shut the Hell Up. You have no idea what you're talking about," or something like that. That's not the title, but that's what the article is about. I know this lady. You can't push this crap. It's not true. And finally some of them back, and which, by the way, Robert Mueller didn't get her. Robert Mueller passed and let some lower scum at justice go ahead and try to get a couple of notches on his belt by taking this woman out, by adding a couple of bits of loose change to the Russiagate hoax. Here's my two
Yeah,
cents, and by
that's
framing
it.
up some poor lady. It's
Yeah.
unreal, man. It's completely insane.
That would have changed nothing if, like, all it did for them, all it added to the Russiagate thing for them was it like provided content for 1 week's news cycle. That's
That's right.
it. And they just tried to destroy this woman's life, locked her in prison. I mean, like you said, just shows the depravity of it.
Yep.
It's
But so
like you
wait, so
mentioned
back to
my,
the origins. So we don't know whether John Brennan and Hillary Clinton went golfing or bowling or smoking crack together, or where exactly and how this was hatched. But it looks to me, and see, one more thing I said, the Brits pretended that they handed this to him, but it doesn't look like there was anything that was based on. It looks like he just asked them to do that. But then he also confirmed that to Frontline, that this begins in the end of 2015. Well, we know now, because of all the newly released stuff, and I'm sorry, I'm not 100% on this stuff, but I know a bit of it, that it was at the very least in March that the Dutch eavesdropped on the Russians eavesdropping in on the Democrats. And they knew that the Clinton campaign is coming up with a story to smear Trump, to distract attention from her missing emails and that FBI investigation into her scandal. So it's looking more and more like that was the origin, but I'm saying no, Brennan started it. He came first in 2015, potentially coordinated with her, but then she and the campaign were on it by at least March. They hired Perkins Coie, the law firm, on April the 1st. And those are the guys who hired Glenn Simpson from Fusion GPS, who hired Steele. And they also hired the Georgia Tech team that did the Alpha Bank hoax and helped with the fake attribution of the DNC and DCCC hack and leak and all of that, as well as CrowdStrike and all that. So, and then of course the FBI, and we know for sure because the CIA covering their ass, or at least, it's, I think what happens is it's compartmentalization, different desks and different departments and different dudes. So we know somebody at the CIA, and it couldn't have been Brennan, but somebody at CIA sent a criminal referral to the Department of Justice about the Hillary Clinton plan to frame Trump for treason in this way. And so the FBI got that and then quashed it. So, and we know that they knew all along that Hillary Clinton's team has this plan. I don't know if the FBI, I'd have to go back or maybe look forward and more to find out if the FBI knew that the Democrats were working with the CIA at that point. But we know that they knew that the Democrats were cooking this whole thing up to pin on Trump, and which means that every bit of investigating that the FBI pretended to do was always a hoax and was always in furtherance of the real plot, which was the plot against Trump. And you can see how over and over, and this was already in the Durham report. It'll blow your mind. If you haven't read, I beg everybody, read the Durham report. There's the new declassified annex, but it is just amazing how many times they pretended not to know things so that they could proceed. even as everything is coming up debunked. Everything in the Steele dossier is coming up debunked. FBI doesn't believe a word of it. John Solomon reported they created a big spreadsheet of here's every claim in the Steele dossier. Here's everything in it that's true. Here's everything in it that's salacious. And then you can see how everything in it that's true is just open source stuff and nothing that anyone is in trouble for. And then everything that looks like it might be criminal is obviously completely made up and verified nowhere, right? And all of America's spies in Russia said, what? We never heard of any of this. Carter Page and getting some giant kickback for some giant oil deal with Rosneft or whatever, $700 million. Give me a break. This is all pathetic. They laughed it right out of the room. They all knew it was fake. The CIA dismissed the Steele report as pure internet rumor. The professionals doing their job just took one look at it and threw it right out. And yet they included it anyway. And they say, oh, it was just an annex to the most highly classified version of the report for Obama only. But that's not true, because if you look at the great Substack Undead Foya, he has this great thing where he compares claims in the ICA with claims in the Steele dossier. And you can see where they're just plagiarizing and rewriting like a junior high school student. But they're taking the conclusions out of the Steele dossier, which is totally made up nonsense about Russia's determination to help Trump win and all that. And they're putting it right in there. And by the way, one more thing. People can check the record. It was April Glaspie Day, July 25th, 2016. That I interviewed Jeffrey Carr, the computer security expert, on my show. And he'd been writing about this for weeks. I was late to the game before I finally got him on. And I interviewed him, and he explained that any company or group of researchers or whoever who claims that they can tell you who hacked a server just by examining it is lying. One organization in the world that can tell you who really hacked that server, and that's the NSA. And they can tell you with 100% certainty, because they can follow any packet anywhere in the world. They can rewind the whole internet and watch whatever they want. So if the NSA doesn't know who did it, then it happened on site. Somebody went in there with a thumb drive or something like that.
Seth Rich.
Online.
Seth Rich.
What do we know about the NSA? The NSA would do nothing but give low to moderate confidence behind all of these claims by the CIA and or FBI. And the NSA wouldn't stand behind them because they absolutely were not coming from the NSA. And that, my friend, is 5 days before they ever launched Crossfire Hurricane. The core of the whole story was debunked on my show.
I remember I saw a lot of people, and to a certain extent, even myself, which I have no excuse for because I should have known better, but a lot of other people who were Trump supporters, who at first they were like kind of worried, like, man, they're going so hard on this on every channel and every agency. Like, maybe he didn't do what they're saying he did, but he had to have done something, right? Like they wouldn't just do this. And as time went on, they start to realize that, like, oh no, actually he's innocent. Oh no, actually he's being framed. And one of the mistakes that they made is that they really underestimated the level to which a huge mass of the MAGA people were very plugged into this story. They were listening to Dan Bongino talk about it every day. They were listening to podcast, everything. Like they were very plugged in. You talk about, forget Carter Page, talk about Igor Danchenko or Joseph Mips. They knew all about him. They knew all that stuff. And so it made it so when they came out with these like speak and spell, like kindergarten level lies, it was doubly insulting because the people were like, because they knew the lies weren't even meant to stand up to like basic scrutiny, let alone you're throwing them out in front of people who are listening to Dan Bongino tell you break every like single event down every day or reading every John Solomon article, And I remember myself, like I was obsessed with this story in 2017, and then the Mueller testimony happened, and it was such a total disaster that it was like, it was like, it was the way we felt in 2008 or late 2007 into 2008, being in the space of people that really saw the housing crisis coming and saw the whole like subprime just disaster. I was reading blogs called like Housing Panic and Housing Bubble Blog and stuff back in 2004. And so I'm watching this and you're kind of like wondering like, oh, this is interesting. It all makes sense. It jives with the economics that I know and that I sort of get on with. But then when it starts to happen, you're still like, no way. You just get the popcorn. You're just watching it. And that's how the Mueller report, testimony was. And it was crazy because like all the Democrats, not just your average like supporters out there, wine moms and blue-haired college students, but like you can tell like David Axelrod, like by the way he was talking about it, they thought Mueller was going to come in there and just freaking light Trump on fire. Like they thought this is going to be the big show. This is it. And it was so bad that people like me who've been following this obsessively are like, all right, finally, here we go. Okay, they got caught. Now we're going to have a reckoning. And it became clear very quickly, just like with the financial crisis, that, oh, nothing's going to happen. And I can't keep reading about this stuff or I'm going to like, you know what I mean? I'm going to start Fed posting somewhere if I keep reading this stuff because nothing's going to happen. So I just sort of backed away from it.
Well,
But
you know what's cool now is you can just live all your vicarious rage through the Department of Justice. Let
yeah,
them give John Brennan and Jim Comey fair trials and then lock them in the supermax next to the other terrorists like Ramzi Youssef.
they have to go hard on these people, dude. And I
Oh,
don't say
yeah.
that out of a sense of partisan revenge or
Absolutely.
anything like that. This is like republic breaking stuff. This is the kind of thing when the security services take an active role in our politics like that, when they decide that they're the Praetorian Guard that knows better and they're going to choose the emperor, that's the end of the republic. I mean, to the extent that, one exists now, it's the end of whatever this thing is that we've got going. Once that starts happening and it works and they get away with it, it's never going to stop.
Yeah.
And so we have one chance to make sure that every future FBI director knows, every future CIA director, they're not going to get Obama, and they probably shouldn't. There's certain kinds of presidential immunity stuff I'm sure Trump doesn't want to mess around with, but the president or the presidential candidate like Hillary Clinton can't do this on her own. She needed Comey. She needed Brennan.
You know what?
And in the future, if they want to try something like that, they're going to need people like that then. And so those people need to know in the future when they think about doing this again, that when a new Hillary Clinton comes to them and says, hey, I got this idea to stop this monster from winning the election, that they think back and say, you know what? The old Hillary Clinton and everybody else skated scot-free while Jim Comey and John Brennan went off to prison. So I am not getting involved with that. That is what we have to do.
Yeah. Well, and look, I mean, what you say about the counterproductivity of locking up Obama. I mean, when Ehud Olmert went to prison in Israel, everybody knew it was just because he was corrupt and it was the rule of law. It was the federal police who took him down, or the Shin Bet, whatever, but it wasn't a partisan thing. In this case, just Trump locks up Obama. We could very well continue to do that back and forth and make things really ugly around here. Lower down guys, yes, I think at least it's within reason that you could do that. But is that really right that Comey's going to go to prison? No. So I think here's what we should do. And this is what they really should have done with the torture thing, I guess, as well. Because they went back and forth. Maybe we should do a blue ribbon commission. Maybe we should do some indictments. And they end up doing neither, right? So, but here's what you could do. Is you have Bongino and whoever, and their men, whatever, the Pam Bondi's men, I guess, over at Justice, convene grand juries. Oh, did we lose our guy? Have them convene grand juries and issue essentially formal indictments, and not ones just full of assertions, but full of documentation to support the claims, and then just issue the full indictments, but then just don't press charges. Don't actually lock them in prison, as much fun as I might have, watching that. But instead, truly indict the hell out of them in the public, where even Charlie Savage at the New York Times has to admit that, man, this is some pretty ugly stuff that I went along with here, kind of thing, and just, make it the ultimate truth and reconciliation thing. Well, Jim Comey certainly is guilty of felonies. For political reasons, we've decided maybe not to push and to lock him in solitary confinement like he deserves, but we all know he deserves it, and go ahead and make that much clear at the very least. Because when you're talking about prosecuting people that powerful, the reality is they don't get prosecuted. It's not law. It's policy. It's politics rather than the rule of law that applies at that level. So, in other words, you can make your magic wish that these guys are going to go to prison. Which, by the way, they did try to put Trump in prison. So might he go that far? Like, yeah, we'll see who goes to prison. Like, you know what? I'm not against it. If he wants to go that far, I certainly wouldn't protest. But I guess I'm just saying, maybe we get the most truth if they would just, persecute them publicly, but without actually locking him up. That kind of deal. I don't know. It looks like Darryl's gone, and we're over time anyway. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to interview Matt Taibbi tomorrow, and I'm also going to interview Anthony Aguilar, the Green Beret eyewitness to the war crimes in Gaza as well. And then I'm going to go celebrate Ron Paul's 90th birthday over the weekend with a bunch of good friends. And then we're going to be back here next week, and I will have done a very deep dive on all the newest developments in Russiagate, which I have touched on at least some of that stuff here today. But we'll be able to really, I hope, tighten down the most important aspects of the latest developments in some kind of organized fashion for you. And we're going to get Darryl an Ethernet cable.